Top 5 Diesel Engines of All Time. Link in the description below to the full article. Number 5, International DT466. Whether you know it or not, you've spent time around International's DT466. School buses, box trucks, farm tractors, small bulldozers, and dozens of other applications have been powered by this legendary i6. The largest of IH's 400 series engines, the DT466 was the big brother to the 414 and 436 cubic inch tractor engines, which all shared the same block. Its deep skirt cast iron crankcase housed an induction-hardened, forged steel crankshaft with 7 main bearings, utilized ductile iron wet cylinder liners, and featured a 4.3-inch bore with a torque-happy 5.35-inch stroke. Thanks to a robust rotating assembly and 6 head bolts per cylinder being part of its mechanical makeup, the DT466 can withstand a lot of abuse in stock form. According to Hypermax Engineering, a big name in the world of tractor pulling, the iconic IH engine will handle 1200 horsepower before the factory head gasket becomes a concern, and up to that point you can add all the fuel and air you want without worrying about hard part upgrades of any kind. Aside from its anvil-like bottom end, simple 2-valve cylinder head, mechanical injection, and in-frame rebuildable design making it a favorite in the medium-duty truck world, the DT466 found a natural home in tractor pulling also. Today, decades after discovering the limits of the factory components, replica blocks, billet cranks, stronger rods, and solid heads, combined with Sigma injection pumps, triple feed injectors, and multiple turbochargers, DT466-based power plants can withstand 300 psi of boost and turn out more than 4,000 horsepower. Number 4, 66 Duramax. It's the only engine with aluminum heads and one of just 2 V8s on our list, but it's certainly no less deserving of being here. When the 66 Duramax blasted onto the scene in the summer of 2000 for 01 model year GM HD trucks, it boasted the highest horsepower and torque any diesel pickup ever had before, but that wasn't all. Beyond its class-leading 300 horsepower and 520 pound-feet of torque, the Duramax brought common rail injection, the quietest and cleanest diesel engine operation anyone had ever heard or seen, and the aforementioned aluminum cylinder heads to the pickup truck segment. The LB7 Duramax's 4340 forged steel crankshaft was heat-treated, forged steel cracked cap rods were employed, and the cylinder wall's combustion areas were induction-hardened, something GM's rivals weren't doing. Looking back, the 66 Duramax's same basic architecture has survived more than 20 years of production now, and with very few design alterations. It still utilizes a deep skirt, cast iron block, where both the Powerstroke and even Cummins have since gone to CGI, and the same bore, stroke, and valve train arrangement. While it's one of the more complex diesels on our list, there is no arguing with its ability to go the distance. We've seen several 500,000-mile candidates, as well as an LMM version with more than 750,000 on the ticker. Number 3, Detroit 60 Series. Without the Series 60 engine line, Detroit diesel may have continued to lose market share in the 1980s and eventually folded up. Thankfully, that didn't happen. When other engine manufacturers were just beginning to recognize that electronic control was the wave of the future, Detroit developed the 677 cubic inch 11.1 liter and 778 cubic inch 12.7 liter from scratch and hit a home run right off the bat. Each engine's unit injection system was completely electronic and performed flawlessly, as did the rest of the engine. In fact, the initial overhaul interval recommendations of 500,000 miles were changed to 750,000 miles soon after these engines were released. It's been documented that Detroit Diesel, owned at the time by GM, reached out to John Deere in the mid-1980s for help in reviving its dying engine program. A short time later, the 60 series appeared on the scene, which virtually solved every issue the previous 50 series power plants had before it. Later on in 2001, Detroit set its sights on the larger engine market with the release of its 858 cubic inch 14-liter engine. This version, possessing a long 6.62-inch stroke and a 5.24-inch bore, was capable of producing 1,650 pound-feet of torque at 1200 rpm, along with 515 horsepower at 1800 RPM. Number 2, 7.3 Powerstroke. It's not going to win any horsepower accolades or turn over happily in frigid conditions, but the 7.3 Powerstroke will never let you down. The largest diesel engine ever offered in the pickup segment, the Navistar-produced, 444 cubic inch V8 featured a 4.11-inch bore, a 4.18-inch stroke, and packed 210 horsepower and 425 pound-feet of torque when it debuted in mid-1994. Avant-garde for its day, the 7.3 Powerstroke featured hydraulically actuated electronically controlled unit injector technology, HUI, an injection system developed by Caterpillar and leased to International to meet the Cummins emission standards. Direct injected and specifically designed around the use of a turbocharger, it was also Ford's first serious answer to 5.9 Cummins-powered Dodge Rams. A forged steel crankshaft, forged steel connecting rods, although powdered metal units were introduced after 2000, and direct injection, cast aluminum pistons with plasma-coated top piston rings speak to the 7.3's robust simplicity. The cast iron heads featured 2 valves per cylinder but 6 head bolts per cylinder, with sharing. The valve train operated according to a single camshaft in the conventional V8 location within the block, and hydraulic lifters meant no periodic adjustment of the valves was necessary. Low engine speed, big iron components, and, let's face it, a lack of power is a great recipe for making any diesel last, and the 7.3 had all 3 of those characteristics working in its favor. After all, the most powerful version of the 7.3 produced kicked out just 275 horsepower and 525 pound-feet of torque, available beginning in 2001, but only in conjunction with the 6-speed manual, a far cry from the 1,000 pound-feet diesels sitting on dealer lots at the present time. To mechanical injection fans, common rail owners, diesel outsiders, or those whose first exposure to hydraulically actuated fueling came in the form of the 6.0 Powerstroke, the HUI injection system is sometimes frowned upon. However, the system's injectors, high-pressure oil pump, and injection pressure regulator were very reliable in the 7.3 application. Properly maintained injectors are virtually guaranteed to last 200,000 miles before requiring an overhaul, and many sets last well beyond that. Even today, 19 years after production of the 7.3 ceased, repair shops are still pulling original injectors, units equipped with black O-rings, out of engines. Number 1, 6BT Cummins. Not only did the B-Series 5.9 Cummins, the 6BT, revolutionize the pickup truck segment, it made it possible for a magazine like Diesel World to exist. Without it, the diesel industry wouldn't have exploded the way it did and Diesel World might not have even been created. That's how instrumental the 5.9 Cummins was in the expansion of the diesel marketplace. The 12-valve Cummins brought an i6 design, direct injection technology, and turbocharging to the 3/4-ton and larger truck segment when it arrived in the summer of '88, and Ford and GM have arguably been playing catch-up with the Chrysler/Cummins alliance ever since. One look at the 6BT's connecting rods and you start to see why this overbuilt inline-six was capable of lasting 1,000,000 miles, or surviving 4-digit horsepower. Each forged steel I-beam rod gets its own rod bearing journal, each one separated by a main bearing journal, and sports a 1.57-inch diameter floating wrist pin on the small end. When treated to shot peening, micro-polishing, and ARP rod bolts, these rods can live at 1,400 horsepower and more than 2,000 pound-feet of torque. The forged steel and induction-hardened crankshaft is secured via 14mm main cap bolts, while the cylinder head employs 6 bolts per cylinder in its attachment to the cast iron block. Though the 6.7 Cummins block, with the added strength that comes with its Siamese cylinder bores, is the favored crankcase for high horsepower at the present time, the 5.9 block is still a viable option all the way up to 1,400 to 1,500 horsepower. Granted, the 5.9's threshold for horsepower is lower than that in street applications, but we've seen more than our fair share of them in the 1,100 to 1,200 HP range. Simple yet proven, the 6BT Cummins cross-flow, 12-valve cylinder head was cast from gray iron. However, its induction-hardened valve seats and ductile iron intake and exhaust valve rockers, not the common stamped steel type, suggest that it was built for the long haul. In the world of diesel motorsports, the 12-valve head, and its aftermarket variants, is the weapon of choice. When treated to extensive porting, via CNC and/or by hand, and oversized valves, it can flow more than 300 CFM per cylinder, versus 140 to 150 CFM stock.